Welcome back to Abbott's Fields and welcome to our final build episode of our mini-series celebrating the Barnyard Animal DLC for planetzoo. This week we are going to tackle the Highland cow and the Radnor sheep, and we're going to create them a wonderful big field at the back of our farm, as well as creating a little bit of a meadow for some unsuspecting additions to the park. On top of that, we've got this giant empty area in the middle of the farm still yet to fill. I have an idea for that and we'll try and squeeze that in towards the end of the video. If you've been enjoying the series so far, then don't forget to tippy tap that like button. This week I also want you to let me know which animal wins out this episode. Is it the sheep or is it the cow? By placing the emoji in the comments below, all for the sake of engagement. And with that done, away we go. Okay, so this week we are going to start off building something completely not useful, purely for the sake of how it looks, and it's also to solve a little bit of a problem. Now, you may have noticed in last week's video that a certain butterfly walkthrough habitat from our very first episode in this series was mysteriously missing, and that's because I found a little bit of an error. You can't mix petting zoo enclosures with walkthrough exhibit. They tend to crash the game, and they tend to crash the game quite spectacularly. So, to resolve that, because I don't want to let go of our wonderful butterfly walkthrough meadow, we're actually just going to create a little bit of an entrance and pop them over here before we enter into our cow and sheep field. It also gives me the opportunity to build something a little bit more naturalistic that isn't going to be ruined by a herd of alpacas. So we're starting off by building these little clumps of dried bluegrass and buffalo grass, which are going to line the edge of our pathway. They're the areas that would likely get stood on a lot and are not going to benefit from as much healthy ground beneath them as the rest of the meadow would. And then we're going to feather that out with darker, greener buffalo grass, just to allow those textures to blend in with the meadow around them. And then the further we get out, we'll get more healthier plants, more greener plants, and more lush plants. Then in the middle of this meadow, we're going to place down our walkthrough exhibit again, and much like last time, knock all the walls off and bring our butterflies back in. Now this meadow will basically form the walkway or the entrance up to our cow and sheep paddock, but by having this walkthrough exhibit in there as well, it does mean that the guests have got multiple routes to go through. Now, to add a little bit more detail, we're going to create a couple of things. The first one being some bee boxes, and these are based off of the less professionally made sort of crate boxes, which are basically just a couple of coloured boxes with a lid and a handle, and then we're going to stack them up in various different heights and place them around the meadow. All I'm using here is a bit of painted wood, making a nice crate with a shutter for a lid and a base, and then we can go in and recolour each one of them to some vibrant colours, and you tend to find these generally come in fairly bold and bright colours. Normally they've been painted up. Then we're just going to stack them, make a couple of options, and then put them to one side for later. With the bee boxes done, I'm now going to move on to making a couple of orchards, and we're going to do that by taking a beech tree, sinking it into the floor, and then adding some tomato vines to make the apples for them. I'm going to lay them out in a grid and make sure we're covering the area that we intend to. And I'm just going to go in and give them a little nudge because, let's face it, they wouldn't grow in a perfect grid. Now, these trees don't fully hold up to a large amount of scrutiny. Unfortunately, the vine texture and the vine colour is slightly off to the leaves, but they do the job well enough, and certainly in passing as you go by them, they give the right effect. I would absolutely love if we had some smaller spheres though, so that I could just individually make some apples. That would probably work a little bit better. I then went in afterwards and decorated the orchards up with a couple of baskets and a couple of ladders, and then we're just going to plot down some of those beehives in different areas around the meadow, and we're going to use the falling leaf effect to basically simulate some bees flying up from the beehives. Now, with the meadow decoration done, we're going to start lining out our cow and sheep field, and we're going to do that in a couple of ways. Firstly, we're going to reuse our cobblestone walls that we made previously, and then we're going to line them up one side and leave a couple of gaps. Then we're going to come back with some more creosote bush mixtures. Now, I've mixed in a couple of beech trees, a couple of nettles, and a couple of the new hedgerow pieces, just so we've got a bit of variation as we go along, and you'll be able to see that in the walkthrough. And then then all the holes that I'm leaving, I'm going to use the new rustic metal fence in a rusty colour. And through a combination of these three, we're going to be able to sort of get a bit more of a varied border. Now, once the field is all marked out, it's going to back onto a woodland. So I'm going to then go in and just do a mixture of temperate European trees. I did intend originally to put some deer into here. That never really happened. And I think if we were going down the route of this being a long-term zoo, that's likely where we would end up going with this. However, you're never really going to see back there. So I kind of sort of dropped that idea as I was building. Now, as we move on to the actual field itself, this is going to be fairly basic. I didn't really have a whole lot of interesting detail that I wanted to put in here. And I don't think that these animals would really benefit from that. But what we are going to do, because we are moving away from the canal area and away from the more farm-like part of the animal park, we're going to build in a bit of rock and undulate the terrain just a little bit. And we're going to do that just by using these temperate rocks. And all I'm really doing is sinking them into the ground, rotating them around and finding different textures on there that I like the look of, and then lining it up with the ones next to it. We're never just going to place one single rock. There's always going to be a combination of a few. And that's how you get a nice bit of randomization and also a little bit less repetition as you move along the field here. Now, once we've got a nice rocky cliffside for our sheep and cows to climb all over, we're going to go pretty sparse on the vegetation. Again, the animals that are going in this field are kind of renowned for eating everything green and leafy. So we're just going to have a couple of weeds. I'm going to use the wonderful hosta for that again. And then once we've poked them into all the gaps, we're then going to bring along some nettles just to add a bit of height to them and mix some of those in. And that's really all we need to do with this. There doesn't need to be a huge amount of foliage on it. It is primarily there for the animals to clamber all over. Therefore, you wouldn't really expect there to be that much foliage on it. Now, in order for the animals to be able to drink, we're going to bring across the trough object that we created last week. And I'm just going to mix that with the new water pipe dispenser that came with the Barnyard pack. At the same time, in the background, I'm also going to pop down a couple of food enrichment as well as a couple of toys. Moving on, just so we've got a little bit of shelter. Now, mostly you'll find in these type of farm paddocks that they don't really go all out on shelter. Most of these animals are perfectly fine in the sort of British summer, spring and autumn, and then they kind of get brought into a separate building in the winter. So as a result, we're not going to go big on a barn or anything like that. I just want to make a sort of dry stone barn like we did last week for the donkey, and we're going to knock it down. So we're going to do that by making out a basic framework out of the rustic stone, pop a roof on the top of it with a wooden beam holding it up, and then we're going to go absolutely crazy with the faux rocks. And all I'm doing is taking each faux rock, placing it into the rustic stone, and then going to the rustic stone itself and dragging out some of those colours and popping them on the rocks. If you get enough variation in there, it means it doesn't blend all into one big colourful mess, but it also means that we've got enough shapes that it looks like it's just fell down and been left where it has fallen. What you won't see on the camera as well is I also take a couple of the wooden beams and we're going to sink those into the rubble and just have the ends poking out. They've got a wonderful orange texture on them, so they just add that little pinch of colour. Now, once we've got all the rubble down where we would like it to go, again, we're going to bring back the wonderful hosta weeds just to add a little bit of a merging with the ground. We want that to not look like it's sat on top of the ground. We want it to look like it's sort of fallen into it. And then on the side of the building, just so it's not completely plain, we're going to bring in some of that wonderful ivy again. And we're just stacking this up until it's got a pattern I like. Again, you don't really see this, but I know it's there and I know it looks good. So I'm happy with it. Then to finish it up, we're just going to pop a straw bedding inside so that the animals use it, and we're good. And that's pretty much our entire paddock done. Well, there we go. It's a bit of a short one this week, but it looks really good. Really happy with it. Yeah, that's pretty much the entire. Oh, okay. Oh, wait. You wanted to know what we do on the middle of the. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Let's go do that, shall we? Let's move on. Let's go fill in that little space. It'll only take 5 minutes. Surely, not much to do. Right. Okay, so welcome to my pain, which was deciding that we just fill this small area in with a countryside pub and restaurant somewhere to eat the cows and sheep that we're rearing in the paddock we just created. And I thought, it'll take a couple of minutes. We'll just throw down a quick building. No, this took longer than the cow and sheep field did. So I'm going to cut this down quite drastically, but I will talk you through what I'm doing. I'm going to preface all of this with, this is not how I wanted it to look in the end. And I kind of really need to focus on doing buildings better, which is something that I want to bring to Wildlands. And I also have a couple of one-off projects very shortly to announce that will help with all of that and hopefully showcase that off a little bit more. So how do we build this? So we've basically sectioned it into 2 bits. You've got the old style of the building, which is white painted brick. It's got these wonderful sort of dark brick weather bricks at the bottom to give it a nice lining, slate roof on top. It's a double floor, and built that as a structure. And then we've got the newer section, which is going to be a more modern sort of add-on restaurant that's going to be made out of plaster, and we're going to use a lot of oak wood inside of it. We're starting out with the older building here, and we're just getting our doors, windows and edging in, just using white wood to frame it all out. And it's very much a traditional English pub, very much a case of using whatever was available at the time and then repainting it about 30 times till we get to this point. Once we've got the doors and windows done on the older side, we're going to then move on to the more modern setup, and that is going to basically reuse our wooden doors that we used on our farm shop. To do that, we're going to frame out the doorways with the same cladding wood, just so we've got a nice frame for them to sit in. And then we're going to go grab the blueprint that we have already got up on the workshop, and we're going to place that down and fit them to these gaps. Now the idea is that this newer section is a little restaurant. It's sort of been added on fairly recently, obviously, as the farm park has got more popular, and it is there just to provide space to add in some tables, etc. What I have got inside this setup is a restaurant facility so that guests can come in and can use these tables, and underneath the floor here we also have pathways so that they can access each of the tables and use them correctly. Inside, once we've got our roof and our doors on, we're now going to start putting up a bit more detailing. And we're going to start off by running some ceiling cladding boards. I'm going to use these out of the conservation cladding pieces. These are going to make little rafters, and we're just going to run them about roughly the same amount of distance all the way down this new building. So as you look up, it looks like you're in what would likely have been a converted barn. And then we're going to pop in a couple of central beams just to keep it all lifted up. That's all we really need to do for the newer section. For the older section, however, I want it to be a lot more countryside pub, older building style. So we're going to start off by making ourselves a nice log fire. I'm going to use a couple of these cast iron pieces mixed with some glass just to formulate a little glass fireplace. As you can see here, just using some of the cast iron poles, a planter turned upside down, and a window planter for the base. Side out them with the stained timber wood, and then pop a little hinge on the front as a handle. This worked really well, and we can mix it with the fireplace African piece to get our warm hot coals going in the bottom of it. I'm going to place that down on a nice piece of concrete, and then we're going to build a fireplace around it out of brick, which we're going to fill in the gaps either side with some stacked logs. Now I did have a bit of a challenge here in that we don't really have many small logs that look good. Very few of them have a good texture on the end. A lot of the Oceania pieces unfortunately go very blurry on the ends despite looking quite good from the side. We've got a couple in there, but as you can see they're all fairly large. So what I did was I got 3 or 4 of my favorites and just sort of mixed them about, and at least that gives you some variation in the texture and sizes. And then we're just going to stick them in the wall. There is a chimney on the other side, so you can't see the ends of the wood poking out. Now with that section finished, we're going to move on to creating a bar. I'm going to make it out of older stone and wood mixed. I'm happy with the result, but I think we could certainly do a lot better if there was a lot more planning involved. And I think for a future iteration of a similar type of pub, we'll probably get that a little bit more traditionally focused. This looks okay, but it looks like, you know, some boomers come in and bought it and renovated it to be like a modern chic pub, and the outside really doesn't reflect that. I'm going to pop a nice piece of timber on top for a bar top, and then I ended up off camera as well bringing in a beam down each corner just because it looked a little bit empty vertically. Unfortunately, we don't make this wood any shorter, which is a pain. Again, we are very much struggling for smaller pieces when we're making this. Now, to add a little bit of authenticity, we need some bar taps, and we're going to do that by sinking in a brass base plate, and then we're going to use these metal handles coloured black with a little LED mount underneath, also coloured black. and then a hinge coloured gold to make our handles. And these turned out all right. I didn't actually know what I was going to use to make these. I just started playing around with shapes, and this is kind of where we ended up. At a distance, they look great. I'm sure there's probably a better piece to do it with, but I can't actually think of one. To finish off the trim on the bar here, we're going to put a wonderful little foot pole. You see these to stop people kicking the bottom of the bar out of the way. And obviously if you have chairs there, it gives you somewhere to put your feet. And we're just going to use the cable for that, again coloured in a golden bronze colour, run it down the length of the bar, and then we're going to use the LED clamps, also coloured bronze, to attach it. I'm actually really starting to like these LED clamps. They're becoming very useful across a couple of builds. Now with the bar area finished, we are going to just pop down a couple of chairs, and the closest I can get is the same as what I used in Namoy Bay, which are these Indian sofas, which if you go in and change the colour so it's not quite as patterned, they are probably the closest we get to sort of a standard wooden sofa bench that you find indoors. I would love some wingtip chairs and some like leather sofas. In fact, just an entire furniture pack would be great. Moving back onto lighting now then, I'm going to run some conservation light bulbs everywhere. In the newer part, we're going to put on these shades. In the older part, we're just going to leave them as lighting. And you can see in the background there, I've added a bit more modern wooden decorations to the walls in the newer part. We're not going to put anything in the older part. However, just to decorate up the wall, we are going to do a bit of cladding. And we're going to do that using the painted wood. And we're just going to make a framework and then fill that framework with some tongue and groove wood cladding. And we're going to run that all the way around just to frame it off and make the walls look a little bit less plain and a little bit more decorated. Again, wood cladding is one of those things that we really could do with an actual texture for, an actual item for. I did consider using the shutters, but unfortunately they were a bit too small. Moving on to the outside now, we're going to create ourselves a patio. We're going to do that using the same method we used last week to make that path. Really like how that turned out, and I really like how this turns out. This is the limestone cap, or the limestone pillar top, and we're going to sink it to the floor, make it a concrete colour, and then it allows us to get these wonderful little cement lines in between them. We're going to make a little offset brick pattern and just cover our entire patio, smudging them together at the ends to make sure they end nicely. And then just so we don't get any kids falling in the canal, we're going to colour the new rustic fence black and white, very much mimicking the canal rope points that are along the edge of the water there, and just run it down the side of our patio, finishing off with some of the tables, parasols and bins from last episode. Just to add a touch of greenery and stop it just being a plain open building, we're going to make a couple of planters. We've got one here and one on the far side. I'm going to make these little bulky bushes out of the pea shrubs, which works really well. Indent a little beech sapling in there just to add a bit of height. And then we're not going to go too crazy with the plants. I love these cabbage trees, these little ones. They make nice little, I don't know, like yucca plants. And I also popped, for the first time ever using the Virginia creeper, just to add a bit of colour. On the opposite side of our restaurant now, I want to make a small play area, and it was really the only way I could think of bringing in this new picket fence that we've got with the new DLC. I'm not a fan of the American style of the Barnyard stuff. I like the more British stuff, especially because most of the animals in it are British animals. So it's a bit of a shame we didn't get more British themed scenery pieces. However, to create this area, I've just surrounded a bark pathway with a picket fence, and then we're just going to pop in a sandpit, some of these domes, a couple of tyres to jump up and down on, and then we're going to make ourselves a wonderful little swing set that reminds me of one I had when I was younger, which was basically just made from cast iron poles and a seat. So we're going to start off using some of the painted metal rods, angling them out to make a little triangle A-frame, and then we're going to duplicate it, run it down and add a swing to it. Now this is one of those occasions where for once the scale of the rope and the rope knots actually work really, really well. So I can't sit and complain about all of the scale all episode. These rope knots work really well, the swings look great, and I just changed them to a couple of different colours so they're a bit more fun. The final addition to our playground is going to be a seesaw. We're going to use an upside down plant pot again, as that makes a nice little fulcrum in the middle. One of the wooden boards to make the main part of the seesaw. And then we're just going to sink in some stained timber boards to make some seats at each end. Under the seats, we're going to sink in some of the smaller tyres that came with the Barnyard DLC. Then we're also just going to pop a guttering handle into the top to make a nice place to hold onto. And with that finally complete, we are now finished with this week's episode. But more importantly, we are also now finished with our download content mini-series for the Barnyard Animal Pack. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed building it, and it's been a nice refreshing change to not focus on a zoo, but focus more on the countryside, the surroundings, the beauty of what we can build. I can't wait, however, to get back to Wildlands and really start building some of those big showcase exhibits again. I will be doing one more episode of this mini-series, and that will be next week's video, and that would be where we do a walkthrough tour, and I want to discuss with you my thoughts on how I feel this download content pack is, sort of a mini review, much like we did with Antara Park and the Eurasia DLC. I'm going to leave you with a few cinematics of us zooming around our brand new created enclosures, and whilst you watch those, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to tippy tap the like button. It really does help me out more than you will ever know. Similarly, if you're not already subscribed, make sure to click the subscribe button down below, and then you won't miss any of our video releases. As always, we will be having a brand new stream every Wednesday, and keep an eye out on the community tab for a brand new updated schedule where I'm hoping to bring far more content to you all. That being said, I'm going to leave it here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye guys.